Chapter 11. Nicole. "You're so quiet, Ari. Can't you tell me what's bothering you? Please, darling." Nicole tossed her long blonde hair back. It just touched the shoulders of the soft pink silk suit that graced her slender 5 feet 9 inch frame. With high heels, she was slightly taller than Ari. Meticulously groomed and a perfectionist with her makeup, she habitually wore the latest Parisian fashions, yet never seemed overdressed. She looked intently into Ari's dark and troubled eyes. Ari avoided her gaze and turned to stare at the profusion of red and yellow tulips blooming next to the small sidewalk café where they were seated at Le Petit Pont. Just beyond the narrow strip of flowers and close-cropped lawn, the heavy afternoon traffic crawled sluggishly along Quai Montebello, bordering the river Seine. In the background rose the majestic spires of Notre Dame. "It's nothing, Nicky," said Ari unconvincingly, taking another sip from his glass and keeping his eyes glued on the traffic. "Nothing at all." "Don't say it's nothing when I can see what it's doing to you." Nicole's deep blue eyes searched his face in concern as he continued to stare past her in silence. "Please, love." A native of Paris, having graduated from the Sorbonne shortly after she and Ari had fallen in love and she'd moved into his apartment, Nicole was now doing her residency in neurosurgery. This evening was one of those special occasions when an opening in both of their busy schedules allowed them to relax over dinner together at one of their favorite sidewalk cafes. Ari had been careful not to embroil her in his revolutionary activities. She only knew, in the vaguest of terms, that he was passionately involved in some kind of international student movement that took far too much of his time. Exactly what that entailed and what his responsibilities were, he had deliberately kept from her. It was best for her own safety if she knew nothing. A barely audible sigh was her only answer. For a long time they sat in silence. "I'm sorry," Ari said at last. "It's no big deal. I'm just tired." She reached over and straightened his open collar. "Darling, I don't believe you. It's got to be more than that. Something to do with that student movement you're so secretive about." "You know why. I just don't want it to intrude into our private life." "It does intrude all the time, like right now. Better that you should confide in me than this silence. And anyway, you know it's not healthy to keep everything to yourself." "You don't tell me everything that goes on in the hospital." "I would if it bothered me, like something's troubling you right now. You worry me." "Look, there are things that I haven't been able to tell you, but I'm putting everything down in writing." "Why in writing?" interrupted Nicole. "Why not just say it now?" "You don't understand. It will all be in a sealed package, to be opened only in the event of my death or disappearance. If certain people know that would happen, well, it would be a kind of life insurance." Nicole leaned forward and looked intently into his eyes. "What are you saying? Someone might want to kill you?" Ari shrugged. "Does that shock you?" "It scares me. You can't just drop it there. I'm entitled to some explanation." He reached for her hand. "Please, Nicky, don't be afraid. Nobody's going to kill me, but there are some people I've worked with who would like to get rid of me if they could. They need me desperately right now, so I'm in no danger. Yet. But someday, fairly soon. So that's why you're worried. And I was chiding you. I'm sorry." "Actually, I wasn't worrying about myself. I was thinking of China. Something tragic is going to happen." "How do you know?" "I go there once in a while. 2 weeks ago, for example." "You do? You told me you're going to Berlin to lecture." "Of course." Ari forced a laugh. "The less you know, the better, for your own safety." "Ari, this doesn't sound good. You've really got me scared." "Now you know why I didn't tell you. I didn't want you worrying." "Well, I'm going to worry plenty if you don't come clean." "Don't ask for that, Nicky, please. I'll tell you some things, but let's keep it the way it was and avoid this subject. You've got to trust me, okay? No girlfriends here and there? Nicky, you know me better than that. You've captured my heart so completely there isn't even the tiniest corner that anyone else could get hold of." Nicole smiled. "I'm sorry, love. I was only teasing." "I hope so." Ari reached out to touch her cheek. She was not only beautiful and intelligent, but there was a priceless quality deep inside, loyalty, steadfastness, trustworthiness, that came through in their moments of intimacy. Their eyes met, comfortably, laughingly, and he knew again why this woman had his complete trust. Her keen mind and sensitive, gentle nature had been both a challenge and a comfort to him. "Ari," she persisted, "after what you've said, well, you have to tell me at least something, a little bit, now. Please, darling." He turned to focus on the rush hour traffic again, hesitating. At last he said, "It's an unbelievable story." He paused for a moment in an agony of indecision, then plunged on. "I shouldn't, but I will. It goes back 25 years. I was a kid of 20 then, idealistic, hating the lies and oppression in the so-called people's democracies behind the Iron Curtain. I can't go into the details, but there are some things you ought to know in case something, let's say, unpleasant happens to me." "Ari, I love you with all my heart. I'll do anything, go anywhere, endure anything. You have to trust me. Please." He drained his glass. "First of all, Ari's my real name, not Hans Mueller." "It's not a nickname just for me to call you?" "No." "If you're not really Hans Mueller—" "Look, that's a name I took as a cover. I didn't want you to call me Hans, but by my real name. So I had to tell you it was a nickname just between us. In fact, I don't even know my real last name." "You don't? Go on, let's have it all." A different kind of fear was written on her face now. Ari hung his head. "Nikki, I'm sorry, but it was for your own good." "So what's in your past that you had to cover up? You have to tell me." "I escaped from East Germany in '64. "That's nothing to be ashamed of." A great relief expressed itself in her relaxed features now. "The way it happened and why is a mystery I've lived with all these years. To tell it might expose the 3 amazing characters who got me out to the West, which I mustn't do in case they're still operating in East Berlin. That's where I first met him. He was the leader." "Him? You mean the American you introduced me to as a business associate that you used to know in East Berlin?" "Roger? No, that's another part of the story." "He's really a business associate?" "Yeah, sort of. He represents an international banking conglomerate that's, well, frankly, involved in everything from laundering drug money to banking fraud and gun smuggling. So far, they don't suspect that I know these things about them." "And you're partners with them? Ari, so they're the ones who want to get rid of you?" "They'd like to, but I'm not really a partner. There's money involved, but it's complicated, and I can't talk about it now. Let's forget that for the moment, okay? I'm not talking about Roger and his group, but the 3 mysterious characters who got me out to the West. They seem to be part of an anti-Marxist faction inside the East German regime. Well, at least that's what I was supposed to believe. I don't know what to think now, because 4 years later, one of them showed up here at the Sorbonne during the 1968 student riots. That was before your time." "I was 7 years old," laughed Nicole, "and Aunt sent me a Barbie doll from America for my birthday. How could I ever forget that? But go on." "Well, briefly, I had organized student demonstrations around the world, from Berlin to Madrid to Berkeley, and then it got out of hand. Right here at the Sorbonne, the students took over the university. Riot police came in with armored trucks, water cannons, tear gas. 10,000 students fought back with Molotov cocktails. 8 million workers, half the French labor force at the time, went on strike, took over factories. It was hell for a while. Students and workers marched through the streets of Paris, smashing windows, burning cars, chanting, 'De Gaulle, adieu!'" "I remember seeing that on TV," exclaimed Nicole. "It was terrible." "Well, the students were given the most sweeping reforms since Napoleon. Workers got big raises, which, by the way, nearly bankrupted the country in those days. But it wasn't adieu. De Gaulle won the next election by a landslide. Politics is so corrupt. It has little relationship to things as they really are. But we students didn't understand that at the time. I learned a lot, I can tell you." "And you had organized this whole thing around the world?" asked Nikki in admiration. "Already, back then, when you were still a student working on your doctorate?" "Yes, to begin with, but I didn't have firm enough control, so it got out of hand, lost its cohesiveness, took on local issues and self-destructed in the end. I learned plenty from that experience." Ari stared off into the distance, reliving memories. "Well," he said at last, "as I started to say, that was when this same guy from Berlin suddenly showed up here in Paris. Came up to me one day on the street, said they were impressed with what I'd accomplished in just 4 years in the West, and that they had further plans for me. He even gave me some excellent suggestions that helped me found the organization I work with worldwide today. They had plans? Who are they? I don't know. Sometimes I think I'm losing my mind. I'd seen him, the very same man, in nightmares that I'd had periodically for years, even before he arrested me, or pretended to, in East Berlin. In nightmares, Ari? The very same man? You're sure? Absolutely. Be honest with me, Nikki. Do you think I'm crazy? Of course not. It's not unusual to dream of someone you may have seen somewhere, someone in a crowd perhaps. You don't even remember, but the face made an impression. It's nothing to worry about. No, Nikki, it's more than that. Why do you think so? It's happened 20, 30 times. In dreams, he stares at me. I'm totally helpless, sucked in, out of control. It feels like he's trying to take over, think for me. I fight it, try to break free. He closed his eyes for a moment in pained memory. It's even happened during the day lately. Suddenly I see his face and strange thoughts begin to race through my mind. Like what? Initiation. Follow me. Higher consciousness. It feels like I'm being taken somewhere. Nicole sat in quiet thought. At last she said tentatively, "It could be some kind of mind control. There's so much we don't know about the brain. Some of the operations I'm involved in, well, skip the technicalities, but we're considering the possibility that one mind can affect and even take over another from a distance. Is that what you're afraid of?" Ari nodded. "It sounds bizarre, but I get the feeling that it's happening." "And you think he's connected to Roger and his finance group?" "I know he is. All three of the mysterious figures are. Roger won't admit it, but I'm sure he's lying. The CIA's involved with these, whoever or whatever they are, and I've discovered that Roger is with the CIA, and the banking consortium doesn't know that's where his real allegiance lies. They arrested me, the three of them, at Roger's apartment in East Berlin. But Roger swears he was just as surprised as I was. Thought they were Stasi. Is he telling the truth? It's possible he didn't know anything at that time, but I'm sure he does now. One of these days I'll have all the evidence. Not that it really matters." Nikki turned her empty glass round and round, staring at it thoughtfully. "I think," she suggested cautiously at last, "that they've been trying to take over your mind. Not entirely, that's not possible. I mean, it would be obvious to anyone who knew you if that happened. But to influence your thinking, to plant some thoughts, key ideas that would lead you in a certain direction, that would be much harder to detect." "You really think that's possible?" Nikki nodded. "What I do in the hospital, of course, has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I do a lot of reading just to keep up. It's hard to get data because most of the experiments in this area are top secret, involving the CIA or KGB. Ari nodded solemnly. "That ties in with a book I read recently about CIA involvement in psychic experiments, leading to contact with entities from another dimension. What do you think of that?" Nikki sat up very straight, folded her hands on her lap, and spoke earnestly. "I'd take it quite seriously. We're spending millions trying to contact intelligent life somewhere in space." "Exactly what I told Roger the other day. He just ridiculed the idea, which makes me think he's hiding something." "He must be," said Nicole thoughtfully. "Common sense would tell anybody that we're not the only minds in the universe. Suppose those three you met had been taken over by some minds from who knows where, out there somewhere, and the same entities, or whatever they are trying to take over your mind and body as well." "That's what it feels like. My God, I can't let it happen." Nicole's eyes expressed a concern beyond words. "Ari, I'm going to consult some of my colleagues. Tomorrow." "No, you can't do that, Nikki." "Relax. I won't say whom I'm talking about. Just a patient. I want to get some opinions."